the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Stephen Sakach here with Tullio, Siragusa, and Maher. Today, we ask the question, is the future of business about helping employees self-actualize? So will climbing the corporate ladder mean climbing Maslow's hierarchy of needs until you hit self-actualization? I love when we start talking consciousness models, guys. So I'm gonna jump in here real quick and try to briefly go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs before we jump into the conversation. So, I don't know how many of you out there fully know this, but it's a pretty common one. And so it's the one I think most people are familiar with as far as consciousness models. So I want to go through that just briefly for those who aren't familiar with it. So it's often visualized as kind of a pyramid with layers that represent different levels of human needs. The idea is that you need to satisfy these lower levels before you can move up to the higher ones. And the highest level is this self-actualization. So at the base of this pyramid are the physiological needs. So they include, the basics like food, water, shelter. These are the essentials you need to survive, essentially, why you get a job, right? And then just above this level on the pyramid, now moving up, we have safety needs, which encompass, personal and financial security, health and well-being. I think this is where most employers, certainly not all, tend to kind of stop. They provide some of the basics here. And then there's this middle layer of the hierarchy that holds love and belonging needs. This is focusing on relationships and friendships. This is where our social lives fit into this pyramid. Good companies focus on trying to help with culture here to help with some of this. Next up, we have the esteem needs. This involves the need for self-esteem, respect, recognition from others. Your better companies try to help here. And I'm not just talking about, the Employee of the Month award, but a good company builds a system here so they are consistently operating on this level with continual recognition and respect. And then at the top of the pyramid, we reach this self-actualization needs stage. This is where individuals reach their full potential. They're engaging in activities that lead to personal growth and fulfillment. So Maslow believed that each level unlocks the next layer up, so culminating in this self-actualization where personal and professional growth is maximized. So in the grand scheme of things, really very few companies focus on the personal, part of the personal and professional growth. Research by Maslow showed that individuals who can achieve this state are better at reconciling contradictions, embracing uncertainties in problem-solving scenarios. So self-actualized people are typically exhibit this superior problem-solving skills. So I wanted to drop in this background today when talking about personal growth and fulfillment. But let's talk about the future of business. Will the sole purpose of business no longer be about maximizing profits, but maximizing profits and people? Tullio, is self-actualization is the future of business? I think we kind of all agree that it is, but why?
I think it's not only the future, it's what it was intended to be from the beginning of time. If you look at the agricultural age, everything we did was about self-actualization. I mean, some would say it was about survival, but it was really about learning how to have harmony with the land and extracting value from the land, nurturing the land, taking care of the symbiotic relationship between nature and human. And that's how we thrived. And then we moved into this industrial age where it was about automating a lot of these functions, using technology to enhance these functions and introducing new things that could happen. All that happened through innovative thinking, and many of the folks who did that self-actualized themselves, like Michelangelo and so on. But over time, somehow we realized we could use this stuff to make more profits, more wealth, and So those individuals self-actualize themselves, but somewhere along the lines, it got lost. This idea that my job isn't to just earn money to take care of my family, but to actually grow and become something more. And so I think a lot of the newer generation are realizing, I don't want to just do something to quote unquote make the man rich, or work for the man, or whatever the expression is lately, right? But I want to be able to do something meaningful that fuels my soul, so to speak. And so they're looking for ways to join organizations where they can grow, where they can make an impact, where they can become part of something greater than themselves. They can have meaning behind what they're doing. And many of them are realizing that most organizations aren't set up that way. So it's letting them down. And as a result, you're seeing a lot more freelancers, or what's called the gig economy, emerging, where people are like, I can still add value, but I could do it on my own terms. I don't want to work as an employee. I want to be as a contractor, as a freelancer. I still add the same value, but on my own terms. And so that's a movement that's happening quite fast. And then there's those companies who realize this is happening. We're not going to survive if we don't adapt. So they're doing it really for meeting their business needs. And then there's those organizations who realize, actually, this is good for business and for people. What if we actually cared about helping people actualize and created an environment where people can do that here? And a byproduct or by benefit of that is that we actually grow as a business, because we are surrounded by a bunch of people who want to self-actualize. So I believe that this is merging together, the gig economy and companies who are a little bit more empathetic than others, and we're realizing I can't just pay lip service to this. I actually have to do something because it's actually good for my soul as an executive and everybody else. And you're going to see this merging at some point, which is all going to be about what's the value that I can contribute to an individual's life by them coming here? What opportunities do I create for them? And less about what can I extract from this person who's a cog in the machine. So this is a shift in mindset that some organizations are making, some are not, and those companies are probably not going to make it. And I believe the future is in the hands of those who embrace this idea of enabling people to self-actualize.
So, yeah, you talked a little bit early on in your answer there about consciousness levels like the agriculture and industrial. Those weren't without their problems, right? So it's like the consciousness of the time, it also had serious problems with empathy and serious problems with, various other abuses. And you'd see like, slavery, or you'd see child labor issues or environmental factors, right? But that's part of kind of that process of evolution, is that push back against those things, right? So this is how consciousness is growing. And so it's like, hey, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. As you're kind of growing with that consciousness in business, right? So I think like where we're growing right now, we're kind of at a much higher stage of our consciousness where we see the wrongs there. We see it, how badly you treat people or how badly you treat the environment. And so as consciousness grows, so does business, right? It sort of has that same sort of growth process. And if we're looking at consciousness maps, we know where the future of consciousness is. We know where this higher consciousness is. And just like you showed, like you mentioned, business and society is going to be reflective of those higher stages of consciousness. So I think when we get up, like you move up that pyramid, or there's some really great, more advanced consciousness models that really get into the details of how people think. But I think as society is moving up those, and business is just going to be reflective of that. So it's almost like we know this is the future of business, right? We actually know this because
exactly
of
what's
history.
What's different is there's a collective intelligence that's taking place because there's more access to information, and with that comes more education and more knowledge sharing, which wasn't possible during,
and that's why it's growing,
the dark ages.
Why we're hitting these stages. Yeah, this is why we're hitting these stages faster, is because of the availability of that information. So, way back when, you've got like, Gutenberg and movable type, and suddenly, consciousness is growing because the technology changed. So now it's like technology on your phone. You've got anything and everything, and apps that are
And
going
there
to
were,
help you self-actualize and things like that, right?
and there were some bad actors who intentionally kept people down. And
Yep.
they could do it back then. You can't do that today. It's impossible, right? We've seen it with protests and so on. There's a collective intelligence. So there's a significant change that is making it very different today. Go ahead.
I have to add to that collective intelligence. It's fascinating because I genuinely believe that these authoritarian workplaces are shifting that economy towards that direction of those saying, hey, I don't need to be treated this way. I'm going to go try to find an environment or create my own environment, which is the freelancers. So me being one of them, right? I believed at one point that I got to a point where I believed deep down intuitively that there's something better for me than to be experiencing this. I had to make a decision to say, hey, I'd rather go starve and figure out my freelancing than continue to be disrespected in my workplace. And I took that shift. But it was interesting as I made that shift and I took that consciousness of saying, hey, the people that I'm going to work with within my freelancing, I'm going to treat them better. And lo and behold, as I continue this path, naturally a company like Zero Company came around that had this empathetic approach and was able to pick me up. Now, when I think about that, that was a push. I got shifted towards that direction. I got shifted toward the gig economy, which then the companies that understand that this is good for business and there's some great talent in those who believe in this empathetic approach, I was able to follow and say, wow, this is a company that fits my culture. Why not join this collective of individuals who are growing together and grow as a team? So it's amazing. I think this is happening across the board. I think companies, the authoritarian leaders are pushing this evolution because they're going out there, treating their employees a certain way, and it's forcing people to make the decision, and people are just getting smarter and smarter and smarter and knowing that, hey, we don't have to deal with this anymore. I'm going to go find a company that cares about me and my growth.
There is one saying that's been consistent, which is the saying power, knowledge is power, right? Except back in the day, that knowledge was protected in a closed garden by a certain level of individual. Now that knowledge is available to everyone. So everyone is empowered. Obviously I'm very passionate about this topic, right? But ultimately, as people gain more collective intelligence and support each other through this process, that's the key thing, because unity is what makes everything happen. When the employee starts pushing back and saying, no, I'm not going to work with you if you're going to do this. No, I'm not going to work in a company like that. And that becomes more public and more prevalent. Then sort of like you're on notice, right? I think what's happening is the higher consciousness is putting businesses on notice. Businesses are on notice by employees saying, we're not going to take that, right? We're not going to tolerate that. And if you want my talent and my skills, you're going to have to hire me as a contractor, or you're going to create an environment where I feel supported. And we're not there yet, but it's happening. And that's a good thing that it's happening.
Yeah. And I think you've got these younger generations, right, that are actually reaching these higher stages of consciousness faster, simply because of where society's general gravity is of consciousness, right? So it's higher. So they're going to be pulled up there much faster. So they're coming into the workforce, like Ash said, looking for something better. And if not, they're going to figure out something better because they're already, taking that journey much faster than our generation, the generations before. I'm just talking in bulk, stereotype right here. But I think you see that push coming through of the younger, employees coming through with needs for more meaning, more purpose. And then you do have these older employees who are at that life stage point where they value this more, right? So you've got some of these older leaders and things like that, so that they're almost in alignment with their younger employees coming up. And if you're not in alignment, that's what you're going to see is some of these, the freelancing and all that, and the finding a better way. And it's just going to be a huge competitive advantage if you're not in alignment, right?
I think you said something really key there, Stephen, is it's not that the older generation has sort of like had a ha-ha moment all of a sudden and now is in alignment. It's that we've come to this place where we've sacrificed our ideals long enough because we were sold this idea that this is what matters, right? Climbing the ladder and all these other things. So we bought into this idea and pushed ourselves, even to the point of not doing things we like just to fulfill this ideal that was sold to us. The newer generation, call this bias or not, is a lot smarter. They're not buying into that. They're like, I'm not buying that, right? I don't want that ideal. In fact, they're willing to co-share their living space. They're willing to not go after the similar things that matter to us, possessions and so on, just so that they can have more freedom to pursue what they're really passionate about. And I think those of us, the older generation, always wanted that to begin with. So we're more than happy to enable that, especially if we're in a place where we can have businesses that can empower that for others. It's just our way of saying, I'm going to create something I wasn't able to gain for someone else. So it's a beautiful thing that's emerging and happening when that takes place.
And that's why you're seeing, I think, that leadership and management theories is all sort of changing to this more empathetic approach we've talked about in some past episodes. So it's like this, we're emphasizing more of this empowerment, this more, service attitude, right? More empathy. And all those align with what, this younger generation of employees is, has going on, but also they align with those concepts of self-actualization. So that gets us back kind of to why we think this is the future business. You've got consciousness and you've got now leadership too, helping with this higher consciousness type of leadership skills. So it's all pushing everything toward that. And I think too, also you've got some of the things like that. I think the younger generation is bringing more awareness to like mental health issues and things like that, right? That wasn't even really in the conversation before, and now it's like, hey, yeah, no, you've got to care about your employees because it's the right thing to do. It's the kind thing to do. And so it's now more of these things are in the conversation. And on top of that, you throw in things like the phone or the technology we've got, right? So that now you've got, I don't know, like your Calm app or whatever kind of apps you've got that are really helping you, grow right at your fingertips. So you've got all these things coming into play here. And this is why, if you don't believe this is the future of business, this is why it's going to be. It's just all the momentum there in the world pushing us toward that.
And technology has also become an enabler in this as well. You see stories of what was otherwise impossible unless you had some major institution behind you. You see self-published authors, self-published artists. Just wait till you begin to see self-created movies with AI, where you have individuals who are going to disrupt major studios. It's coming next. It's happening. So as a result of technology and even AI, it's created a equalizing level playing field, where if you're got the desire and you're creative, part of your self-actualization is to see your work come to life, and you're not dependent on some third party who decides who's in and who's not to make that a reality for you. So whether companies adopt this or not, it's happening, and those who do will benefit. Those who don't will be disrupted. But it's a beautiful thing to see and witness, and how technology is actually an enabler towards this, if used correctly.
So, Tullio, I've seen this a lot lately, talking about technology and talking about AI, where it's just been a little bit louder in the US about possibilities of like a 4-day work week. And I think because of AI, it's like, okay, hey, if it's going to make everybody, much faster, replace people, how are we going to handle this? What are your thoughts on this bubbling up of a 4-day work week?
Well, I actually just published a blog on this particular topic. It's called the 20-Hour COO, or the Fractional Executive Who Leveraged Generative AI. And honestly, there's no need to work more than 4 days a week. With Gen AI, you can be so much more productive. You can create so much automation that trying to work a 5-day work week, it's like archaic. It's like, why do I need to push myself to put in the extra day? There's no need for it. With the right technologies, with AI, you can get so much more done faster that you can be just as productive. I am 100% not convinced, but I know this for a fact, what I can accomplish in half the time is the equivalent of a full-time executive, because I use generative AI every day in all that I do. If I work on an analysis of something, I use AI to help me make the analysis faster. If I'm trying to determine a market condition, I use AI to do the research to help me get the information faster. It used to take days just to research information. Now it could take minutes. You still have to do the work. You still have to know what you're looking for, but it just facilitates it that much faster. So as a result, we're becoming a lot more productive because of AI. And that doesn't necessarily have to translate into working more hours. It needs to translate into being able to have more balance, because when you have more balance, you're also more productive. So what comes together is these two things. More balance, i.e. more time off in between work, gives your brain a break and an ability to regenerate, which ultimately makes you more productive in the real workplace. I actually tested this 3 summers in a row. A team and I did this. We worked a 4-day work week all week. And I was the most productive I've ever been in my life. And then there's this generative AI component that allows you to be equally productive as if you were working full time, even working 4 days or even working 3 days a week. So there's no reason for us to be slaving 5 days a week, 80 hours a week. Those who are proud of doing that, they're actually revealing they're not very smart or being productive. No offense, guys, if you're watching this and you're proud of working 80 hours a week, that just tells me you haven't figured out how to be productive without working 80 hours a week. Because with technology and tools today, you can, and you don't have to give up your whole life and just singly dimension, I'm really good at work, right? It's about being multidimensional, having everything in my life going. My work, my family, my friends, my time with myself, my time with God, universe, the source, however you want to call it. So all these things are important and made possible because of things like generative AI and technology. They just enable us to do things faster and more efficiently.
So some pushback here. And then maybe we could find a compromise here. So the pushback would be like, hey, well, you've got all these extra hours, then why don't you, double up the amount of stuff you're doing even more so? That would be the pushback. And then the compromise, I would think, would be, okay, what if you've got the 4-day work week, but the 5th day is all about personal development? Like it's some type of, like you mentioned, like some type of personal development day where it's going to help you self-actualize. Like it's going to help you be a better person, which in turn, that the way that impacts your business is like we've been talking about conscious capitalism and where you want this win-win-win scenario across all stakeholders. So imagine these people who are all very, highly functioning, self-actualized people. That's going to reflect on, the employees and your coworker relationships and your customers and your family and your community. And so if you're looking through the lens of that conscious capitalism, multi-stakeholder perspective, instead of just like the investor, single shareholder, approach to business. But if you're looking through that bigger view, this self-actualization, giving your employees more time for personal development, it aligns perfectly with conscious capitalism. It aligns perfectly with the triple bottom line approach of purpose, people, and profit, right? So this is the people part of that. Let me read you a quote from the former CEO of Starbucks. He said, "Treat your employees exactly as you want them to treat your best customers." So I think that's maybe the perfect example of this benefits of this approach, that it's not just going to be impacting your employees, but everyone around them. But Tullio, what are your thoughts on treat your employees exactly as you want them to treat your best customers? And did he just basically restate the golden rule?
I think he did restate the golden rule, but it also speaks to understanding that your employees are also your customers. And if you can't treat those closest to you great, how do you expect them to treat those that you do business with? So there's definitely a correlation between how an employee feels about the company and how they will represent the company in the marketplace. And to go back to your comment about, well, if you could do so much more, then why not work the 80 hours? And that's the beautiful thing about self-actualization. And the key word is self, right? Every one of us has a different version of what that means. So if for you, it's to be an entrepreneur in the next, Rockefeller, then have at it. Enjoy. Use all that time to devote all your energy to it. It is part of your process. But studies show that perhaps being a little bit more multidimensional, having some different things going on in your life, career, your personal life, your relationship with your health, your family, your friends, maybe to you that multidimensional approach is more fulfilling. So self-actualization for that person might be, I work 4 days a week and I devote another day to my family, to my friends, or to volunteering, because that's part of being multidimensional too. So it's the beautiful thing is to have a choice, and it's a personal choice. It's something I make for myself. No one else makes it for me. And being able to do it is in itself a big win, both for the individual and for the organizations.
You mentioned some studies that kind of back up this approach to, really pursuing self-actualized employees. Ash, what kind of studies or data do we have here that kind of backs this up?
Absolutely. So with one study from the Teresa Amabol's research at Harvard Business School highlights that organizations that focus on self-actualization often report higher levels of innovation. Self-actualized employees are more likely to explore creative solutions because they feel secure and supported, which fosters an environment conducive to out-of-the-box thinking, which aligns to the fact that we're moving into the age of the knowledge worker, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mentioned like earlier on in that Maslow discussion was that the self-actualized individuals being better at problem solving, and so if you're better at problem solving, you're better at innovation. So that backs that up as well.
Absolutely.
What else you got?
I think though we're just coming out of the knowledge age. I think we're actually entering the self-actualization age, the age of the self. There's a lot more push on that. And we're just raising awareness to it because we see it and we experience. And many companies kind of like want to just ignore that it's happening because it's a disruption, it's a threat, right? But it's only a disruption and a threat if you fight it. Just like the Industrial Revolution was a threat to the agricultural age, and for 400 years it was fought. And then eventually it's like, what more can we do beyond planting crops with this new ideas and inventions, right? So like anything, there's always resistance up front because change is scary, but ultimately it's a good thing what is happening. So
it's a good thing, and it's a good thing, and it's also, it'll be a competitive advantage, right? So if I'm trying to get my employees more engaged, this is one way, right? What do we got on that, Ash, as far as engagement? Anything there?
Yeah, so according to Gallup's research, underscoring the importance of emotional and psychological well-being as a driver for engagement, the fact is, according to Gallup's State of the Global Workplace report, only about 15% of employees worldwide are engaged in their jobs, indicating a vast potential for improvement through practices that promote self-actualization.
That's pretty crazy.
Only 1.5 employee out of 10 are engaged.
There's a lot of mind-numbing out there, and I bet like AI eventually replaces some of that. So, there'll be some upheaval there. But you also have, high-stress jobs with a lot of burnout, so you're not going to be maybe as engaged there. So, you got the cortisol levels going, and the grind becomes harder and harder. And so if you're in a high-stress job, employers should be helping you build the skills to better your mental health, right? I mean, this is just reinvesting in the well-being of your employees will reinvest in your company, right? So, I mean, help me help you, right? If I can't justify that out of kindness, then, how about your employee turnover rates, as far as that goes?
So ton of research on this topic.
Yeah.
Studies have shown that fostering an environment that supports self-actualization can lead to lower employee turnover, and employees who feel that their personal growth is supported are less likely to leave their job for another one.
I mean, this is
Richard
not
Branson. Let me read this Richard Branson quote real quick. It says, train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so they don't want to. I like that. I mean, it's like, yeah, I
I
want
love
you
that
to.
too.
What were you going to say, Tullio?
Research, yeah, I was going to say, an additional research is showing that about 4 times higher for less engaged employees from the corporate leadership council. So however, the general, so really it's about 4 times less of the turnover rates that are occur. I mean, it's just wild how much research is being done on self-actualization, and how much more employees are engaged and wanting to stay at their jobs and not leave. It's just so much research on the topic, and it's just growing and growing and growing. I think it's going to eventually become science and saying, hey, this is how business needs to be moving forward.
And this isn't like some major reinvention that businesses need to go to. All they need to look at is what they're doing now for training, right? Manufacturing, you go in and you get trained on safety standards. You get trained on how to operate the equipment. So you have all these skills you get trained on along the way. To get really good at your job. But where it's failing and where those companies who are succeeding is understanding the motivation behind what makes people tick. And so it's the motivation, it's the emotional intelligence, it's the mental health, the aspects that are not always shown through the physical doing of things, right? It's understanding that people have a need for that element to be supported, for those aspects to come to life and to be supported. Because I might be really good at doing something, but if I'm not motivated to do it, what's the point? I'm not going to do it well. I might be the best builder of a car, but if I'm not motivated to do it, it's going to come out in my work. So if you're not dealing with the motivational aspects of things, you're only training on skills, you're only dealing with half of what the employee needs to be effective at their job and to find fulfillment in their job. Therefore, you're actually only doing half the job of training employees. Even for those companies who are very proud of tremendous training program, you have to include the mental health, the emotional support, the emotional elements of the relationship that employees have with their work. Those are critically important today, more than ever, especially since we live in a time where there's information overload. You know, like talking about, well, why can't you work 80 hours a week? Well, because back in the day, I could focus on that. Now there's so much going on. It's hard. Like our mind is bombarded with so much information, good or bad, that you just need to like detox from time to time and help people do that.
Yeah, totally. I think, like you said, talking about motivated employees, that's bottom line related stuff, right? Too. If they're not motivated, you're going to see it in the bottom line. And so if you don't want to do this out of kindness, you might be looking at some more of this just hard data and says, hey, this is just going to, the numbers say do it anyway.
And historically, companies that have had the attitude, if they're not motivated, we'll just fire them. But that's actually a reflection on you as an employer, not on them. Why are they not motivated? Perhaps they started highly motivated, but they got involved in an environment where they don't feel supported. So you're at fault for them losing their motivation. So you got to be also we need to raise the consciousness of the organization too, how the organization thinks about itself. Don't drink just the Kool-Aid thinking everything is so awesome. Be honest with yourself. Why are people not motivated? 15% employees engaged. That's not a reflection that they hired 15%. I'm sorry. 85% of the employees not engaged is not a reflection that you failed to hire 85% of your staff. It's a reflection of something's broken on how you're dealing with your staff. And so the sooner you realize that as a business, the sooner you can become aware of your own need for improving your own consciousness as a company, as an organization. Because companies are like living organisms, right? So the more you treat them that way, the more you think about what is the consciousness of the business? Well, if 85% of the employees are not engaged, maybe we're doing something wrong here. Let's look at that. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's not just drink the Kool-Aid that we're selling to the board or the investors. Let's be honest with ourselves and deal with the issues and work through it and get everybody to that 85% engagement. Maybe only 15% are unengaged. That seems to be maybe we have 15% of the staff. That's not the right staff. That's a different thing going on. But until you make the investment, you don't really know what's going on until you're honest with yourself and say, what do we need to change?
Yeah, that's focusing on the people part of that. The triple bottom line is that what are my KPIs, for my people? And one of them would be, yeah, if 85% are not engaged, you've got a serious systemic problem in the organization. And that's why you focus on something like a triple bottom line, or go wider with like a conscious capitalist approach, is so that you can look at all these areas and come up with these creative KPIs that help you function better as a whole sort of organism that's, healthy, not one that's got parts of it, that are unhealthy and worse. Ash, what else we got as far as stats?
So a study sourced according to the research by Bass and Alvilio, leadership styles in organizations promoting self-actualization often evolve towards more transformational and inclusive approaches as opposed to authoritarian or transactional styles.
Yeah, so we've got a whole episode on empathetic leadership, and I think you went over probably some data in that one that was just showing that this approach, it's just the data just backs up this approach, right? It's not just, like I keep saying this, it's not just, if you can't be kind and think this is the right thing to do, well, let's lead you this other way and show you that, yeah, there's ROI behind all of this, even being a, empathetic leader, taking that approach versus authoritarian, little tyrant that runs that section of their business.
My way, because I said so.
And it's interesting. Tullio made a point. It's the people that and the organizations that are going to struggle are the ones that are fighting against this. So I have peers that believe, and I say peers 20 years older than me, but they own businesses where they're starting to have this challenge. And these are the individuals that take pride in their 80-hour work weeks, and they take pride in and then they also how they feel about society today is that the millennials or the younger generations taking over are lazy. So that's the consensus from some of the peers that are fighting against this. And those are the guys or the companies that are struggling right now from what I'm seeing. So everything, Tullio, some of the things you shared were fighting words for some of these people. If you had them in a mixer and you shared with them that you just have to treat your employees better. What do you mean? That's the kind of feedback you get back from these organizations, or some people that run these organizations.
They're just smarter than you. They really, that's what it is. Accept it. They're not lazy. They're just not motivated by this hustle culture you're selling. No one's buying it except for you. You keep needing to sell it to justify it to yourself, to make the excuse why you don't show up to dinner at your family or show up at your family gathering, or what other thing you justify from the hustle culture, right? Let's be honest. You're selling it to yourself and you want everybody else to be on board because misery likes company. They're just smarter. They realize that's not the way you live life. And that's not a productive way to be either. Let's just call it what it is.
I think there's a balance with kindness and hard work, and that can get you everywhere. I think that combination in there. And so, but yeah, I think the older generation always talks about the younger generation being lazy. So it's just like, I don't even listen to that because it's like, oh yeah, you don't think your parents and grandparents were calling you lazy or whatever when you were younger? I mean, come on, get out of here. It's just, I don't know. It's just something that happens when you get old. You just start picking on the younger generation or something. And it's like, oh, come on, you're in the same place. So we've got some studies that back this up. Tullio, what are some challenges of helping employees with personal growth, and how can we overcome those? What comes to mind for you as far as some of the challenges here?
The biggest challenge is related to trust. Most employees are not used to a company saying, we're here to support you and help you, because it's a departure from the traditional norm that's been predominantly sort of a hierarchical fiat type structures where you're expected to just produce something like a cog, right? So when someone feels like someone's saying that to them, they almost feel like, is this a trick? You're just trying to get under the hood to see what I'm really all about. So there's a little bit of fear, and so that a trust factor needs to be established. And I think leaders can do a great job being vulnerable and openly admitting when they make a mistake or are exposing their own flaws. That creates psychological safety for everybody else to say, wow, this is actually legitimately company that's striving towards intimacy, where you can be real. Here's the CEO admitting that they messed up on something and they're asking for help to fix it. That creates the kind of environment where people feel safe to go about being supported. And then once you work on that and you establish that, then, creating a model where people actively participate in shaping the future of the company. If you do some kind of quarterly goals, whether they're OKR or something else, get the company involved with it, have them shape it, have them contribute. Don't do it top down. The more you do that in the first quarter, you do that, it might feel a little awkward. People are like, is this really the way they want to do it? And then the second quarter, they're kind of like, well, this kind of works. By the time you go into the third quarter of doing it, people are like, yeah, I'm all over it. And they own it and they just take it. And then you've made a transformation. It doesn't take very long, but there's a few things you got to do along the way. You got to create psychological safety. You've got to train the executives to be okay with being vulnerable that way and humble enough to say, I messed up, and creating that environment. So that's part of the process. And then giving it away, believing and trusting that your people have an equal vested interest in seeing the company's success because their own actualization depends on it. And that's the key thing. When you treat people like adults, you realize they have goals for themselves. They want to actualize themselves too. It's an innate desire. So if you empower them to go and do it, they will get it done. You don't have to manage them like children with a whip or all these micromanagement tactics to make sure they get their job done, right? If you have to think that way, you're already failing because you're not going to get the best out of those individuals who actually want to grow and self-actualize. It's your job to get them to bring that to life. And figuring that out takes some process. But the key thing I have discovered is teaching the top executives, especially CEO, to be vulnerable and create psychological safety. Be the first one to admit you screwed up and say, I need your help. You do that enough time, people start to realize I can just be safe to speak my mind here and be supported. The other thing is I love like what we're doing at Zero Company. We obviously have instituted OKRs, but one of our OKRs in this quarter is to bliss our OKR. As we talk about bliss, which is building love into scalable system, we've designed it so that every employee can step up to champion an OKR, even if they're not comfortable doing it or they don't know how to do it. And the rest of the team's going to support them along the way. And just recently, we had one of the employees actually lead the weekly OKR check-in, and they did a phenomenal job. They did it. They ran it. And we're giving that away too, so people can step into leadership and do that. And so as you begin to do more of that and you create an environment where people feel supported and people are encouraged to be supporting, everyone plays an equal role, CEO or whatever. We're just all there together on the same boat together with equivalence. And that's the key thing. You have to establish equivalence. Then these things are possible. So at the end of the day, you got to get away from the fiat hierarchical structure. You've got to create a model where it's like a friendship, not a family or a business. It's a friendship model. We're all friends helping each other be successful. And friends call each other out when one goes the wrong way. Friends celebrate each other, and friends support each other when you need a shoulder to cry on. So I think that's the key thing, is to develop a model where there's a friendship involved in the business.
So Tullio, you talked about like that employee doing the OKRs. What comes to mind for me is, when we talk about self-actualization, people they might be thinking, oh, it's going to require a lot of resources. I'm going to have to get, special people in here to train and do all these things. But really, that's just being creative. That's just giving someone an opportunity that they didn't have before to grow and to confront a fear or something like that, right? So it's not anything that's requiring like a big budget of some massive business. If you're a big business, yeah, you can expend all kinds of things into self-actualization, personal growth, trainings, and all that stuff. You can spend a lot of money, and you should, because it's going to give you a competitive advantage. But even as a small business, there are little things like that where it's just giving someone an opportunity to, face something, a challenge they haven't faced before. Or you could even do, even just having books or things like that, little online courses. There's a lot of little things out there. If you're just creative enough, you can invest creatively and allow them to jump in there and grow just from getting reps at something they're they haven't even thought about before, haven't tried before, or you're just finding these opportunities. We're lucky, Tullio, because we've got you, and part of your work is kind of as a life coach, and talk about the series that you're doing for the staff right now.
Yeah. So one of the things, after a couple of quarters, kind of getting to know the team a little bit, I realized that in order to support the team to do more on owning and championing the OKR was to actually help the team step into leadership and be leaders. So we're doing a whole series on developing EQ-based leadership principles. It's out of a book that I haven't published yet that highlights 12 principles to an authentic leader. And we just started with the very first principle, which is how to embody a no-problem context. And it was mind-blowing how many people began to see how you could be a no-problem individual and still get someone else involved in the process of solving the problem without feeling like you have to say yes to something and own it, even though you can't. And without feeling like you have to say no because you can't. So we went through this example of like someone being asked to do something and it's a deadline. And the no problem context says, yes, I can do it. But let me ask you something. I got 4 other things going on that are also due on that time. Can you help me prioritize which are these I should put on the back burner? And now you're involving the other person in the process of helping you solve the problem. So you can create awareness and still be a no problem. This is just the first series. And it's so deep having a no problem context because you're learning to be humble. You're learning to ask for help. And also you're learning to respect yourself as an equivalent. You're not a child that you're being asked to do something from your parent. It's an adult to adult relationship. Love to do it. Want to say yes. Here's what I got cooking. Let's figure out how to make it happen, right? So that's just one little example, but people really enjoying it because it's about them. It doesn't benefit us necessarily as a business. It benefits them, which also benefits us as a business.
That skill you just mentioned, what I like about that is that it's the problem solving one where, hey, can you help me solve this problem? And you're showing them, this is what I've got on my plate, right? What you've done here is it's an empathetic skill. It's like, hey, I want you to see through my perspective. Let's just shift perspectives here for a second. I see that you need this done. Let me show you what I've got. I've got this, this, and this. Look through my eyes, and help me solve this problem. But that's actually, it's a skill you're developing there.
And there's more to it too. There's more to it too, because some people would be prone to say, no, I can't, I got a million things going on. So they're like, how do I establish boundaries, right? That came up a lot. And that's kind of a victim mindset too. Whereas an empowered mindset, a mindset of a leader doesn't see a problem, doesn't need to set boundaries, establishes relationship, is in relationship with the other person. And it's also understanding the principle of realizing that if you're being asked to do something, it means you have it to give it. So maybe you're not recognizing that you have it, but someone else does. So it's actually someone else acknowledging you as capable, number one. Number two, the fact that they're asking you, you might think you're the giver, but they're actually the receiver, and you're also the receiver because you're being asked to give, which is an opportunity for you to step up to do something, to step into leadership, to give of yourself. So in essence, it's a cyclical thing. Me asking, I am receiving, but I'm also giving. And you helping me is giving, but you're also receiving the ability to share yourself. So when that happens, it's like magic happens. So it's such a critical thing to learn how to be in relationship with people and do it in an empathetic way. And the magic starts to happen that way because people learn to communicate and support each other. So it's a lot easier to say no problem when you have that culture and environment in place.
Yeah. And I think if you've got that, like I've said in the past, if you've got like connection as a goal, with other people, you're not going to just be, putting up walls and stuff. It's going to be like, hey, let's help each other solve this problem. And you're going to do it in a productive way versus all the different ways it can go sideways. And, someone's asking you to do something. We talked about this in the resentment podcast. It's really easy to build resentment in those kind of scenarios if you don't have connection as kind of that goal within your company and your culture. Ash, what comes to mind for you when we're talking about some of the challenges for employees with personal growth and how we can overcome them?
I think the challenges that employers have for employees is just literally taking the time and prioritizing your team's mental health, their self-actualization, and actually expressing that empathy. I think what happens is that companies are so bogged down by the day-to-day tasks, and maybe they just don't have the awareness that this whole new economy is coming about because they're just so caught up in all the work that they have on a day-to-day basis. When they're done, they might just want to check out. Maybe they're not taking that extra time to read the stats and information research that's showing the world is changing. So I really think it's just a challenge. Going back to what we mentioned earlier, it's just individuals and organizations still fighting against this new economy. It's fighting against actualization and higher consciousness. And they're the ones that are going to struggle the most. Once you can release it and just be open and accepting that this is a new world where we're all here to help each other out. And if you benefit your employees will benefit you tenfold. If you could buy into that and have that faith that maybe in the short term it might be a little messy because not everyone's a culture fit in every company for organizations like this or environments like this. Maybe some individuals are more a better fit for a cutthroat environment because the world is changing. It's the same as when cars were introduced when there were still horses around. This was a conversation that Elon Musk had with Joe Rogan where he said it was a really weird time. Horses were dying on the street and being dragged across, and that was very normal. The cars was a new concept, and people were pushing back against cars. They thought the norm was the horses being on the street and it just being a mess the way it was. But that was the norm of the time, and then things eventually evolved, and I think that's what's happening today. A little bit messy for some organizations that are fighting back, but as soon as everyone passes through that threshold of acceptance of the world's changing, then we're going to see a new environment of that collective consciousness and everyone working together towards common goals that benefit and push that consciousness forward. So I think that's where we're at. I think really the challenge is just the pushback and the buy-in. And I think once that bypasses and we get through a couple more years of seeing the research just keep growing and growing, then we're going to see a whole new economy and a focus on consciousness in business.
So Tullio, I mean, what do we do with that person who's maybe not as equally receptive to self-actualization initiatives and things like that? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but yeah, maybe some prefer a more traditional work environment, or aren't interested in types of development opportunities you're offering. What do you do to help these disparities in engagement?
We send them to therapy. No, all joking aside, actually that happened. There was
not wrong.
No, I mean, I've seen it where employees come into an environment like that and they're so used to a command and control structure that within a month or two, they just kind of like start to feel anxiety. Like, who do I showcase that I'm doing my job? How do I showcase that I'm actually earning my keep, so to speak, right? So there's tremendous anxiety and stress that some people go through. And that's an inherent thing about, there's actually a lot of self-esteem issues associated with that because their worth is predicated on whether someone validates them. And it's sad, but it's not their fault. They've become that way because of the cultures they've been a part of. So the systems and the culture actually creates that problem. So it's a lot of patience with folks like that in coaching them and helping them believe in themselves, that what they offer is valuable, whether someone's watching or not, whether someone's patting their backs or not. And where necessary, give them a little extra support. But there is definitely a path forward. And for that individual, their self-actualization is actually learning to believe in themselves. In most cases, they struggle with that. So if you can help an employee believe in themselves, boy, you've really changed someone's life in a positive way. And that is the greatest gift, to see that. Sometimes it could take 6 months, sometimes a year, but 90% of the times I've seen it. It's incredible to see the transformation. You see someone who was shy, just kind of holding back, just stepping up and leading and charging the way. And you want to follow them because they've actually had all this talent just sort of like quietly hidden away. And it's beautiful to watch for themselves. There's a sense of pride in seeing that. So, invest more time in individuals like that because they have so much potential, so much more to give if they learn to believe in themselves. It takes a little time and effort, but it's possible.
there's probably, I know there's some nuance with this where you can have multiple kind of levels of engagement for people. Like some, you can keep the bar really low and make it just a real simple thing where they can take that first step forward. Others, they're going to want to go deeper and harder and, faster and stronger. So I think if you've got some nuance there of different levels for people to engage and move at their own sort of speed and comfort level, if you put some thought to that, I think that can be really helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, give those people an opportunity to receive some coaching, put them in an environment where they're working as a team. We have the scenario where you can be a champion or a co-champion or a supporter or even an observer in leadership teams, right? The more you create leadership team, the less likely they'll feel threatened that they have to work with an executive or a boss. Like they can work with their peers and give them an opportunity to learn and grow and experience the process. But it is an investment to do so. And it requires some proactive thinking and planning. But again, it's well worth it. And then there's some people that may never make that shift. For the small percentage of people that may never make the shift, you have to want to help yourself too. So if you don't want to help yourself, there's not much more we can do with that individual other than to hope the best for them. But in most cases, again, 90% plus, people will come around.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We went over Maslow's hierarchy of needs to show how self-actualization is kind of at the top there of the pyramid. We mentioned the consciousness growth of society and maps of consciousness back up, kind of where we're heading. We covered some challenges to helping your employees here and how that could be a competitive advantage, actually, and how small businesses can be creative and find opportunities for their employees. And Ash covered some studies showing how it can help productivity and reduce turnover and burnout. And speaking of which, on the next podcast, we unpack what's really burning us out and why our coffee addiction may not be enough to keep those flames at bay. We'll explore everything from the telltale signs to proactive extinguishing strategies. So if you feel like you're constantly running on empty, tune in and learn how to refuel without turning to more liquid caffeine. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.